Welcome to Fundraising Leaders with Drew, where we embark upon a journey to discover the heart and soul of nonprofit fundraising and decode the strategies that lead to fundraising success. I'm your host, Drew Clancy, and I am grateful to be joined today by Dr. Hilary Link, the president of Drew University. Dr. Link's career in higher education is marked by a series of leadership roles that reflect her commitment to academic excellence and global engagement. Prior to serving as president at Drew, Dr. Link was the first female president at Allegheny College. She was the vice provost at Barnard College and served as dean of Temple University, Rome. At Drew University, President Link is prioritizing financial health along with academic innovation, including strategic partnerships to transform the university. Let's jump right in with President Link. Dr. Link, thanks so much for joining us today. Really looking forward to our conversation. Let's jump right in with a question about your role as president at Drew University and how do you see fundraising as you look at your entire role there at the university?
Well, first of all, Drew, thank you so much for having me. Very happy to be here. Always happy to talk about fundraising because I actually see fundraising not just as a part of what I do, but really a kind of integrated, holistic part of everything I do. I really consider myself the chief storyteller and the chief cheerleader for the university. And I have come to really embody the story that makes Drew special, Drew University. And so I see it as, whether I'm on a specific fundraising trip or meeting, I think I'm actually fundraising in the sense of telling the story of the university, cheerleading for the university in every interaction that I have, whether that's with current students or alumni or parents or local community members. Or even, the business community when I'm on a board or involved in other activities. Telling that story is what I feel like I am doing at every moment that I'm being the president. And as you know, when you can tell a really compelling, interesting story, that makes fundraising so much easier because people love to understand the why behind what they're giving to and why it's important that they support that institution.
Oh, love that. So good. So good. Share a little bit, if you would, about how you see fundraising evolving. Traditionally, there's been an alumni participation model. For many years, U.S. News and World Report, I think, was part of the way that universities were evaluated, looking at giving participation. Now that's changed. How do you see, what do you see as kind of the key elements of a successful fundraising strategy today?
Well, I think it's such an interesting question because fundraising is changing, just as higher education is changing radically. These days, maybe seemingly every day or every week, some of the challenges, but the reality is what we represent to our society is changing. And I think fundraising and philanthropy have shifted along with that. Yeah, I mean, as I was going through college and graduate school, there was, and then early in my career, there was such a push for broad alumni participation and
Mm.
that whole sense that it doesn't matter what you give, we just need to have a big percentage of participation. To your correct point, because it was also a really important data set for US News. And now that that has changed, it's really interesting. Obviously, we would still love to have 100% or close to 100% of alumni give back to their alma mater because it is a way of them saying, I'm grateful to this institution. I love what this institution offered me. Um, but what we are seeing in fundraising generally, and this is true both in higher ed and outside of higher ed, right, is kind of a narrowing of the pipeline and a sharpening of the pyramid where you're seeing smaller numbers of larger donors
Sure.
and a kind of lessening of the broad, low level alumni giving that we often focused on. So it is interesting because in an ideal world, you have both, but many operations at many institutions are small enough that they have to make choices on where they're putting their resources, their human resources in terms of outreach and cultivation. And I think finding that balance is really interesting because you want a broad foundation of alumni. And we all know that starts long before people graduate from a university. It starts at many institutions the minute you walk in the door, and certainly before you graduate. But again, we're seeing less of that. And it doesn't change the fact that alumni remain incredibly devoted to Drew University is a great example. Alumni tell me every time I meet with any of them, I owe everything in my life to this institution. But that doesn't always translate into consistent giving from every single one of those people. But then institutions are fortunate because people with larger capacity often can step in and really provide substantial funding for an institution that can make up the difference. Can I just say one other interesting thing that
Please.
I have really noticed? So Drew University is a small institution. We have in total about 2,500 students. Undergraduate, though, it's about between 1,700 and 1,800. And I'm a pretty present, accessible president. I get to know the students well. But this I have noticed, and this has been true both at Drew, but also at a prior institution where I was the president, that younger people, those graduating, they've said something so interesting, which is they're not interested in just giving money to support the general needs of an institution.
Right.
They are very specific. You know, they grew up in an era of GoFundMe, where their friend might say, I have a project. I need to fund this very specific thing. And that has really seeped into their mentality where they will, they're not going to give to the annual fund. They're not going to give to best necessary use from the institution. They want to fund the very specific thing, for example, in their academic major or department that impacted them. So that's a whole other shift where, it used to be that we push so many people to provide general support, but now people really want to be kind of very specific to be able to see the direct impact of their giving.
Hear, hear. How, kind of talking a little bit about the role of major donors. And one of our clients recently, I saw some data that this was a larger public institution, but it raised over $1 billion. I think 175 donors, to your point, made up 60%, I think, of all the dollars raised. So a very, very small number.
Yes.
And I think over 80% were donors of 25, in terms of the dollars raised, were gifts above 25,000. Kind of given that new reality, what does that mean as president of the university in terms of, strategically, how do you approach kind of that reality and engaging with those donors who can truly move the needle?
So it's such an interesting question. And it's one that, we ask ourselves constantly, and we are always thinking about this. I've been at Drew University for 2 years now, and it's been really interesting coming to a, relatively new institution for me and really trying to understand the culture
Sure.
of the alumni, the culture of philanthropy at the institution, because every institution is very different. Even, two small liberal arts private institutions might have, that may seem similar, have totally different cultures of how their alumni have engaged over years, how their alumni have been philanthropic. So a lot of it is, I've had to really get to know the culture of giving at the institution. And
Sure.
to your point, we've actually started to think, well, in two different ways. One is saying, again, to my point, that even older donors, so this isn't just the young
Right.
Gen Zers who want to be very specific, I think even more mature donors want to have more of a say today rather than before in what they're giving. So some of that is, as we look to a smaller potential number of donors who we need to give larger amounts, it's really targeting very specific things that they're interested in
Sure.
and really spending the time. Again, we've moved a lot from big, broad alumni cocktail receptions to much more targeted one-on-one, couple-to-couple conversations about their level of giving, which,
Sure.
as you can imagine, is more time-consuming. But when you're moving into the need to find donors who can move the needle, it's really about how much time you're investing in creating an ongoing relationship, and not so much about throwing a big event once a year, the holiday party type of thing.
Sure.
The other thing, and this has been so interesting, as I mentioned, I see the changes, the shifts in philanthropy in some ways are happening at the same time as pretty major seismic shifts in higher education. And that has led us to actually start really engaging people beyond the alumni base.
Ah,
So in the past, right, if you were going to do a big campaign, you are going to your alumni base for the most part, because those are the people, they're so grateful. They have a great sense of loyalty and a desire to see the institution carry on. And it's not that we don't have that here, but what we have seen is, as we are really starting to talk about a very different future for higher education in general, and the role that a small liberal arts college like Drew is starting to play in that, what we're seeing is that higher end donors and philanthropies, family offices or foundations, so that have not traditionally been in our fundraising pool,
right.
are seeing, they're kind of stepping up to say, no, I want to be involved in this, because they see it as an investment, not just in, I want to support this institution as it is, but I want to be part of the change that this institution is trying to move forward. And that's almost a real shift from kind of
Sure.
grateful donor to strategic investor. And I think that's, we're seeing so much of that in higher education as well. But I've been really interested to watch that play out.
Yeah, let's follow that. Is there an example, perhaps, or something you're thinking of, and whether it's a family foundation or whatnot, like, how that came about, how you approach that, maybe, what it is they might be interested in investing in. Fascinating. Yes. Do tell.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of this is literally real time
Right.
happening. So I can't talk specifics about some of them, but what I will say is this. Again, the traditional, uh, well, let me back up and say this. I think there are different modes of fundraising for different types of institutions. For the elite institutions that have really large fundraising operations, they have centuries of, kind of embedding the idea of giving back to the university in their students and their alumni. And they have a culture that is just going to carry them forward.
Sure.
But then there are many, many smaller, less wealthy institutions. And I put Drew University squarely in that camp. It is such a lovely, strong, student focused university. We've been around since 1867. There is kind of a real moral ethos and a commitment to social movement here. And the students are just incredibly vibrant and inclusive. But we don't necessarily have that really strong machine of, alumni graduate, they start giving.
Sure.
And what's so interesting is, so for smaller institutions, less wealthy institutions, less elite institutions, let me say, like Drew University, what we are also seeing is that the whole funding model of the university is changing. And this is true for everybody.
Right.
It's just that many institutions have large enough endowments that they can kind of cover over this. But the reality is, with financial aid, with merit scholarships that exist, institutions are not getting the full amount of tuition from the vast majority of their students, which is the right thing to do in terms of access and making the type of education we offer available to many, many more people. But the reality is, the actual business model of relying on tuition, which many institutions did for so long, is no longer the solution. And so fundraising has had to take on a much bigger role in balancing the budget,
Right.
or growing the endowment, et cetera. So all of that to say, if you don't have an inbred culture of giving, sustaining the institution, you really do have to look to other sources. And
Right.
what I would say is, the way we've done this, so we have been on an innovation journey for the last year, talking to dozens and dozens of disruptive innovators in higher ed, outside of higher ed, to really, in a very iterative, design thinking way, think through what higher ed needs to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, given technology, given AI, given the way the world is changing. Fundamentally, we all still basically do higher education in many ways the same way we've been doing it for centuries. But the world has changed.
Right.
So we are really out there leaning into the concept, for example, of, like, what are we teaching on a character level to all of our students? And how are we teaching them to be the real creative problem solvers that our world needs? Which doesn't necessarily mean they need to have a history major or a political science major or a chemistry major. They need to be interdisciplinary problem solvers. So that is a long way of explaining that as we have been talking to partners in the ed tech space or AI focused companies or foundations that are literally have as one of their areas of interest how to adapt higher education to the future, that's where we're starting to see interest in funding what we are doing because the story we're telling is not Drew University is a really special institution. It's been here since 1867. It's yes, Drew University is a really special institution. And here's where we're going to be at the forefront of what this crazy world is going to look like 10 and 20 years from now. And people are saying, yes, I want to be part of that solution. And they have no connection to Drew University, but they're excited by the narrative that we're actually trying to fix a big problem that is very systematic, but we're at least trying to fix it here so that then we and they can take the solutions elsewhere.
Wow. That is fascinating what you all are doing. Truly cutting edge. What lessons have you learned so far in this journey, or what's kind of, as you look at the next year into the next, several years, how do you see this continuing to evolve?
So it's so interesting, right? Because we have found a really great reception, even among our alumni. But there are some alums, for example, who just haven't been actively involved.
Sure.
But they might be entrepreneurs. They might be, very different thinkers. And suddenly, after years of kind of saying, like, yes, I love my alma mater, but I have lots of philanthropic priorities. There are lots of other organizations that need my resources. Suddenly now they're kind of sitting up and saying, oh, wait, my institution is actually doing some really interesting different things. And so lessons learned, one is, and this goes back to what you said at the beginning, actually being able to narrate the journey that I have been leading Drew on, why we're doing this, why higher ed needs to change, and where we think we're going with it. That has been the key to getting people to sit up and really take notice. But here's on the flip side, another interesting lesson learned is always having to balance out that, especially when you're talking to alumni, this is their alma mater that remains the place where, in many of their instances, they met their spouse.
Right.
They found their passion. They started their career. They met their favorite professor. They won a conference championship on the basketball court, whatever it is. So I think what's interesting is that if you take a step back from an entrepreneurial innovation standpoint, you think, okay, we're going here. But when you're talking to alums, if you want to bring them along and not alienate them, you have to also be really careful to continue to pull the pieces of Drew University that are always going to be here, right, along with them. Because what you don't want is for them to feel like, and this is not what we're doing, but again, you have to make sure people understand this isn't like we're at A and we're going to completely flip and go to Z.
Right.
It's that we're saying, here's what's so special about this institution that you have cared about for the last 20 or 30 years. These core things are still going to be here, but it might end up looking different. And that's been interesting because we have gotten some pushback of people saying like, yeah, but what about athletic, right? Or like, what about
Sure.
the things that I care about? What about the reasons I, as a kid from New Jersey chose to go to Drew in 1968. So again, I have to keep reminding myself too, right? Like, I am stewarding this institution, but it's not mine. It is still theirs. And so that balance of, I think, leaning into doing future oriented things that will serve us well into the future, while also never forgetting the importance of all the history.
Right. It's not one or the other. It's doing both, and finding the overlap, perhaps too,
Yes.
where those two different approaches build on each other. So, thinking a little bit about strategic partnerships, which seems like a key opportunity for you all. What advice would you give leaders seeking to build these authentic, mutually beneficial partnerships with donors, foundations, etc.?
That's such a good question, right? Because often when you're sitting in the seat of leading a university, you're really just thinking about what can these partners, what can these foundations, what can these funders do for my institution?
Sure.
But I love the way that you frame it because, we always have to remind ourselves the value that we as an institution of higher learning that nurtures and educates and mentors and then launches all these young people into the world, that we play a really important role as well. And, that to me, that goes from the very concrete, right? Often we're a workforce pipeline
Sure.
for organizations, right? So one of the things I always recommend people do is really understand the actual location of where your institution is. What are the workforce needs? We're in conversations, for example, with the New Jersey Department of Labor, because they are really trying to think about jobs for the future and what is that going to look like? And many of us know, for example, that while we think we develop good partnerships with industry partners, it's often like this, that we think we're preparing students to be successful in their workforce, but really they need us to be training them on slightly different things. And so I think we both make assumptions of what we're doing is going to work for them, and what they need is what we already know how to do. And so I do think it's about creating you use the word authentic partnerships, right?
Right.
Actually getting to know both the people involved, but also the actual organization, and trying to figure out truly authentic ways that you can each be a helpful partner to each other, because you don't want it always to be one way. The other thing is, you might even think about how does a university maybe step back from the very traditional, let's say, 4-year bachelor, 1 or 2 year master's, PhD programs, and think about shorter, more accessible, modular learning that an organization or an industry partner really needs. So what is it that we do? We know what we do well. We educate, we teach, we think in new ways. How can we offer something to them that they can't necessarily get even through like a Google University or something like that? So to really think about the special things that we do every day, and then to find partners that are excited about that, but also where you're excited about the work that they're doing.
You're here. What I think you've been at Drew now for 2 years. Thinking about internally your advancement, development, fundraising team. How do you see that? How do you see building that? What are you looking for there? Yeah.
It's so interesting, right? Because unlike, for example, at my two alma maters that, as I mentioned before, they have a lot of resources. They have huge operations, both on alumni affairs, but also in development and fundraising. Drew University is a very small institution. We are very resource light, and therefore we're very we're very efficient in all of our operations. But what that means is that we don't have a large alumni and development operation. But, we have people who have committed to being at this institution, who care deeply about the institution. Some of them are alumni, but most of them are not.
Sure.
But who have really come to know and understand what is special about this particular university, and who are able to engage with alumni in ways that it doesn't feel like a job. It feels like they are sharing that mutual love. So in terms of our operation, as I said, it's very lean, it's small, they work really hard. And I consider myself, as I said at the beginning, really to be the chief fundraiser. So I consider myself to be an active partner to them. If there is someone that they feel like speaking with the president is going to make a difference in really getting someone excited, I am always available to pop into a meeting, get on a Zoom call, travel to see someone if it's necessary. So I think some of it is just saying to them, I'm part of your team.
Right.
But the other thing is, because we have such a small, lean team, we really think of fundraisers as being most people across the institution.
Right.
Also true for alumni engagement people, in that, some of our coaches, for example, athletics coaches who have been around for a while, they have way better alumni databases, knowledge of alumni outcomes, contact information, and connections and networks, way better than our alumni centralized operation may have, right?
Sure.
Because especially when you're at a place like Drew, that is so small, it's the personal contact that people carry with them. So whether that's our athletic coaches, our faculty are often in touch with people who graduated 30 years ago, right? So we think of many people as contributing to the alumni and fundraising operation, even if the team itself, the people with that title, might be a much smaller number.
You're here. What about, as president of the university, your interactions, your relationship with your board? And how do you see that also, obviously, from a fundraising perspective, another kind of key element often in your strategy?
I love our board. They are really, like so many people who graduate from Drew, just really kind, thoughtful people. And having been at a wide variety of institutions where that is not always the case, to me, having people who are deeply committed to the institution, they're not doing this, as a badge or a line on their CV. They're doing it because, again, this is the place that really shaped them, right? Where they met their spouse, where their kids went to school. So they care so deeply, and they're very thoughtful about the institution and about being strategic partners to us. Fundraising is interesting, right? Because we have a relatively small board. And so the fundraising that board does is probably less than at institutions that have boards that are double the size of ours.
Sure.
And I will say that philanthropy is important. We always get 100% giving from our board, but we have a, socioeconomically diverse board, because that is very reflective of the university and our student body. And so not everybody is giving at hugely high levels, but they are giving at their full capacity. And to me, that's the model that you have to look at. And, then what we really ask of them is help us connect to, your former teammates, your suite mates, the people that love Drew as much as you do. And, so we're starting to work. Now, again, only 2 years in, it takes a long time to really form the board around a president and the president's priorities. And the nice thing is, because we have such a small board, we are in the process of growing it strategically. And part of where I am really trying to grow it as well, we have a board that is almost, it's not fully, but it's pretty high alumni, which is very, very typical,
Sure.
right? But I think the interesting opportunity is to bring in people, again, who may not have a connection to Drew University specifically, but who might be really excited about some of the work that we're doing, right? Because they want to be part of an institution that is throwing everything it has at saying, let's try to be the higher ed institution of the future. And that's part of my strategy as well, right? That we obviously need a big alumni base, because those are the people who, no matter what, are going to love, give to, and stand up for Drew. But we do also need people who might be thinking about what Drew is in the process of becoming, and to be part of that next, the Drew University 2.0 as well.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Thinking about this university of the future and embracing a very forward-thinking philosophy, tell us about kind of your personal evolution of that, or as you approach this. Was there a conversation perhaps you've had, or an initiative you were part of that really helped shape your thinking about what's possible?
So it's so interesting. It's such an interesting question, right? In some ways, I feel like I have been leading to this moment for 30 years. I have a doctorate in Renaissance Italian art and literature. And when I was doing my doctorate at Yale, I was very interdisciplinary in how I approached the topic. And there's a reason why I'm telling you this whole story, because it's been a huge evolution for me. So all of my research when I was writing my dissertation, and then as I started teaching early on in my career, was about the intersection of kind of the visual and the literary. So seeing things through different lenses. And then
Love that.
specifically about theories of how to create artificial perspective in paintings in the 1400s, because, it was really in the 1300s and 1400s that they figured out how to go from these very medieval flat,
Right.
it looks like the angels and the saints all have like flat plates on their heads, to something that has real depth. And there are geometrical and mathematical theories that explain to painters how to do this. So the most famous of them is Leon Battista Alberti, who in 1434 wrote a treatise called On Painting. And he explains to painters how to get that sense of a vanishing point and depth in their artwork. And I always paraphrase this, but he basically says, you have to change where you're standing to see the different planes and the different colors. So I always take that as a metaphor to say, if you change where you're standing, you change what you're able to see. And so I have, gone about my path, and I've taught, and I've been an administrator, and I've worked and lived overseas and shifted perspectives many, many times. And it's been kind of this amalgamation of intellectual thinking and learning, academic work, life experience, and then coming to higher education institutions and realizing that, ironically, as places where new knowledge is created, we are pretty stuck in doing things in super traditional ways. We teach in traditional ways. We assign homework in traditional ways. We absorb information in traditional ways. And so, taking kind of as that motto, like, how might we look at this differently? And, it wasn't until I got to Drew University. Drew has a really open minded faculty. It's a community that is kind of open to new ideas, which not every institution I've been at is. And so I was so grateful to encounter people who said, yeah, we know this has to change. The financial model is not really sustainable. It is not working for non-wealthy, non-elite institutions. We know we have to change. And then it all kind of came together where I said, well, I'm going to start talking to as many people who have led through disruptive change as I can find.
Love it.
And as I said, some of those are university leaders, but most of them are not. They're people in industry. They're in the publishing industry, which is another industry that had to completely reinvent itself, right? They're in telecom. Just trying to understand, how have people seen great tumult as an opportunity to kind of pull organizations or industries through?
Yep.
Because I think we can all agree, my first presidency was in Pennsylvania, but I started in 2019 in the summer. And within 7 months, we were in lockdown from COVID. So I think it's fair to say that between that presidency and my time at Drew, which has been marked by global warfare and a lot of political strife, leading higher ed institutions is now all about crisis management and leading through challenge and really hard headwinds. And we also know about the demographic cliff that is basically here. There will be fewer 18 to 22-year-olds moving forward. So the headwinds are all against us. And that's why I thought, I want to hear from people who have faced similar headwinds and done something really interesting. And so I feel like I have been on this crazy educational journey. But it's been the most fascinating last 15 months that I could imagine, because even though we look around and higher ed, I think, is really going to continue to struggle. Institutions are going to continue to close. But to be thinking in these very different ways gives us something really exciting to lean into.
Love that. Love that. Love that. Maybe kind of one final question, Dr. Link. As higher education continues to evolve, and, there are today pressures in lots of different areas. You mentioned the enrollment cliff being one, but also just new political pressures, all sorts of different things.
Yes.
As a university president, in charge of the institution, in charge of raising money, in charge of its future, what do you see what are the key elements to be successful today in today's climate with these headwinds? What do you think are the key things, the key traits that the successful university presidents embody or demonstrate?
Well, my first one is resilience, because people yell at you all the time. That's just, when you're in a leadership position, you can never make everybody happy, right? So you just have to accept that you have to do what you feel is right, but then half the people are going to tell you you're wrong, and the other half are going to tell you you're wrong. And somehow it feels like you're never getting it right. But at the end of the day, you can't make decisions to please one, group or another.
Right.
You have to do what you think is the right thing. So I think it's resilience. It's knowing yourself and your own moral compass really well, right? So that you're not zigzagging to kind of meet the different political tides or, challenges. You want to be a person that even if people don't always like the decisions you're going to make, they start to see kind of how you make decisions, how you move forward, and they may not like it, but they appreciate it.
Sure.
So that's another one. But the last one, and I go back to what we said at the very beginning. It's how well can you articulate why your institution matters. And that is true from a fundraising perspective, but it is true from the existential perspective of existing, especially in higher ed right now. People are questioning the value, the cost model, the politicization, and really saying of higher education and really saying, why do we even have these institutions? They're anti-Semitic, they're woke, they're this, they don't have diversity of ideas. I mean, all of these things, which really are not true, because when you live inside, as I said, this living, breathing, incredibly diverse and different and weird in a wonderful way organism, what you actually see is people figuring out how to talk across difference, how to get along with people who have nothing in common with them, how to live with people from different political, religious, ethnic perspectives, etc. So, but we don't do a great job of telling that story. I think for a long time we have just said, we educate people, we graduate them, we give them social mobility because we know the data, we launch them into careers. Therefore, we exist for great reasons. And really what we're being forced to do is become much better and more convincing storytellers of why does a democracy, why does our society need higher education? And why does my institution in particular exist, right? Why were we founded? Why is that still important? Why is that going to be important into the future? Because the headwinds are going to continue. We are going to need to both continue to narrate why we should be here, but also, and this is a big thing that I think presidents also need to learn, which is flexible thinking. Because we can't just say, we do X, we know we do it well, we don't have to change. I think more and more, well, the world is changing. If we want to still be able to do the life-changing work that we all believe in, we actually are going to have to change. Can I share with you my favorite other Italian literature quote, which is from the 20th century, but a wonderful novel called The Leopard, which is by an author called Di Lampedusa, and it's all about Sicily and when Italy was unifying and,
Sure.
Sicily had been its own island and was now being sucked in. And the prince is trying to hold on to, his territory and his way of life. And his young upstart nephew, who has gone to war with Garibaldi to unify all of Italy, basically says, Uncle, if we want things to remain the same, they have to change. And that's another one of these great sayings that I say all the time, because if we want to keep being important parts of democratic society, whether that's as Drew University or higher ed in general, we have to be willing to say, okay, we've made some mistakes. We could do things differently. We may look different, but we want to still be here 100 years from now.
Wow. Love it. What a great note to end on. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful and enlightening conversation. Thank you for all your good work, and thank you for your time today.
Well, it was a pleasure. And of course, named Drew, you are welcome to come visit us at Drew University in Madison, New Jersey, anytime.
Well, I would love that very much. All right. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.